The night my parents announced they were selling the family home, my brother Derek popped a bottle of champagne at the dinner table. He'd brought it himself. He'd been carrying it in from the car before he even said hello. That's how certain he was. That's how long he'd been waiting. My mother cried happy tears. My father tapped the table like he was accepting applause. And I sat at the far end, the same seat I'd occupied at every Christmas dinner for 34 years, the one closest to the kitchen, the one nobody fought over, and I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because 6 months earlier, on a Thursday morning in June, I had signed my name to a purchase agreement for that house. Every room. Every inch of the property. Every tree in the backyard my grandfather planted in 1974. The deed had been in my name, held inside an LLC my attorney set up, since July 8. My parents had no idea. Derek had no idea. And the champagne he'd carried in from the cold was going to taste very different by the time dessert arrived. Before I take you back to the beginning, if this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe. And drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know. Now let me take you back to where this really started. Not Christmas. Not the sale announcement. Not even the summer I bought the house. This started 34 years ago in a split-level colonial on Birchwood Drive in a mid-sized town in central North Carolina, where my parents, Robert and Sandra Donovan, raised 2 children who they treated like they came from entirely different families. My brother Derek is 3 years older than me. He is the kind of man who fills a room before he enters it. Loud laughter, firm handshake, hair always in place. He played varsity baseball. He chaired the student council. He once broke a neighbor's windshield with a batting practice ball, and my father paid for it without blinking and said that's just what boys do. I was the quiet one. I read. I took notes. I got a full academic scholarship to NC State and came home on school breaks to find that nobody had left my bedroom door open, nobody had saved me a plate from Sunday dinner, and nobody had mentioned to the extended family that I'd made Dean's List 3 semesters running. Derek dropped out of his business degree after 2 years, and my parents framed his associate's certificate and hung it in the hallway. My diploma, what I earned it 4 years later with honors, went into a cardboard box in the hall closet because my mother said there was no more wall space. I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand what I was working with. The house on Birchwood Drive was my grandmother's house first. Eleanor Donovan bought it in 1969 with her husband, my grandfather Thomas, for $32,000. Thomas built the back porch himself. He planted 7 oak trees across the rear property line, 1 for each decade he hoped to live. He made it to 6 of them. When Eleanor passed in 2017, she left the house to my parents outright. No conditions, no trust, no instructions. She trusted them to do right by it. It was appraised at the time at $380,000. My parents moved in immediately and sold their previous house across town, pocketing that equity, $112,000, to fund Derek's first business venture. A sports bar franchise near Fayetteville that closed in 14 months. I found that out from my cousin Renata, who overheard my father on the phone. Nobody told me. But I filed it away. That's a habit I developed early. The thing about growing up as the invisible child is that invisibility is only a disadvantage if you're trying to be seen. I stopped trying to be seen around age 19. I started paying attention instead. I graduated with a degree in finance. I took a position as a junior analyst at a commercial real estate brokerage in Raleigh. I worked 12-hour days and did not complain about it. I drove a used Civic for 6 years so I could save without pressure. By 26 I had my real estate license. By 29 I was a senior associate. By 32 I was regional director for the Southeast Division of a mid-market commercial firm, overseeing a portfolio worth just under $90 million. My annual salary was $184,000. My bonus last year was $41,000. I live in a 2-bedroom condo in Raleigh that I own outright. My parents think I do paperwork for a property management company. They have thought this for 4 years because 4 years ago my mother told her church group that I worked in real estate, paused, and added, just admin stuff, filing contracts, that kind of thing. I heard this from my Aunt Patricia, who has never in her life delivered news gently. I didn't correct my mother. I let it stand. Not because I was ashamed. Because I had already learned that information given freely to my family had a way of being used against me. Derek's latest venture, his third in 10 years, was a farm-to-table restaurant in downtown Wilmington. He opened it 2 years ago with $120,000 of startup capital that my parents provided. When I asked my father casually, the way you ask about the weather, where that money came from, he said they'd been saving. They had not been saving. I knew this because I had seen their financials. Not by any dishonest means. My mother had asked me to help her navigate an online banking portal 3 years prior when their bank updated its interface. She gave me her login information and forgot she'd done it. I only looked once, long enough to understand the shape of things. Their savings account held $11,000. Their checking held $4,000. The $120,000 came from a home equity line of credit they had taken out against Birchwood Drive. Against my grandmother's house. Against the house my grandfather built a porch onto and planted 7 oak trees behind. I closed the browser, handed my mother back her phone, and helped her find the button she was looking for. Then I drove home to Raleigh and sat in my car in the parking deck for 22 minutes. I was doing math. Derek's restaurant started bleeding within the first year. I know because my mother calls me when she is worried and needs to talk, which is different from the times she calls me when she wants to perform. When she is genuinely frightened, she calls me. In October of last year she called me on a Wednesday evening and told me, quietly, that Derek needed another infusion. That the restaurant was going to fail without it. That your father is so stressed, Claire, you have no idea. I had every idea. She told me they were thinking about options. I asked what kind of options. She went quiet in the particular way she goes quiet when she is about to say something she knows I will not like. We might need to sell the house, she said. Birchwood Drive. I kept my voice completely level. I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. Have you talked to anyone about it? Your father has been speaking with a realtor. Someone Derek knows. Of course someone Derek knew. I told her I understood, that I was sorry they were dealing with this pressure, and that I hoped things turned around. She thanked me for listening. She did not ask how I was doing. She never does when she calls these calls, the real ones. After we hung up, I called my attorney. His name is James Whitmore. He is 51 years old and has handled my real estate transactions for 6 years, and he is one of the most precise people I have ever met. I told him what I needed. I want to acquire a residential property. Single-family home. Birchwood Drive in Cedar Falls. I want the purchase made through the LLC, clean and quiet. If the sellers are my parents, we need to make sure everything is at or above market rate and fully documented so there's no question later. He was quiet for a moment. Your parents don't know you're the buyer? No. And I want to keep it that way until I decide otherwise. Another pause. He is not a man who expresses surprise, but I heard him processing. All right, he said. Let's talk about structure. I will say this plainly because some of you are going to ask. What I did was not illegal. It was not deceptive in any way that harmed my parents. They listed a house. An LLC made an offer at full appraised value, $395,000. The offer was clean. No contingencies. 30-day close. A seller's dream in a slow market. My parents' realtor, Derek's contact, recommended they accept it and they did. They received every dollar the house was worth. They were not cheated. They were simply unaware of who was sitting across the closing table, which they never attended because they signed their documents remotely through a title company, as sellers often do. I attended the closing in person. I signed my name, Claire A. Donovan, on behalf of Birchwood Property Holdings LLC. I received the keys on a Tuesday. I drove to Cedar Falls, parked in the driveway, and sat looking at the house for a long time. The oak trees were still there. All 6 of the ones my grandfather lived to plant. The 7th, the one he didn't get to, I have been thinking about for a while. I have a plan for that 7th tree. I did not tell my parents what I had done. I did not tell Derek. I did not tell my Aunt Patricia, who cannot hold water, or my cousin Renata, who means well but talks. I told one person. My best friend Dara, who is a tax attorney in Charlotte and who responded to my full explanation with a long silence and then said, "Claire Donovan, you are either the most patient person I have ever met or the most strategic." I told her those weren't mutually exclusive. She laughed. She was the only person outside of James Whitmore who knew. For 6 months I let my parents believe they had sold the house to a private investment company and that the matter was resolved. I watched Derek post about the restaurant on social media. I watched my mother redecorate their rental apartment with some of the proceeds, a new sectional sofa, a farmhouse dining table, curtains she'd been wanting for years. I watched my father take Derek to a Panthers game with tickets purchased from the sale money. I said nothing. I am very good at saying nothing. Then November arrived and my mother called to invite me to Christmas dinner. She framed it as a special occasion. She said, "We have some exciting news to share and we want the family together." I said I would be there. I did not tell her I already knew what the news was, that Derek had already texted me separately saying huge announcement at Christmas, just trust me. I did not tell Derek I had no need to trust him, that I had been 9 steps ahead of this conversation since July. What I did was call James Whitmore one more time and tell him to prepare a specific set of documents. He asked what I wanted included. I told him exactly. He was quiet again, the same processing silence. Then he said, "You've been planning this since the beginning, haven't you?" "Since before the beginning," I told him. He laughed. First time in 6 years I'd heard him do that. December arrived the way it always does in the Carolinas, not with drama but with a quiet gray chill that settles into everything slowly. I drove to Cedar Falls on Christmas morning. I parked on the street outside Birchwood Drive before I went to my parents' apartment. I sat and looked at the house from the car. Someone had put a wreath on the door. The new tenants, a young couple I had placed through a property manager, had strung lights along the porch railing. The same porch railing Thomas Donovan built with his own hands in 1971. It looked like it should look. Loved. Lived in. Held. I drove to my parents' apartment. My mother answered the door in her Christmas sweater, the red one she has worn every year since 2009, and pulled me into a hug that was warmer than usual. There is a version of my mother that is genuinely soft. I have seen it in fragments over the years, late at night, in the car, on the phone when she doesn't know I can hear the tremor underneath. She loves me. I do not doubt that. What I have doubted, for a very long time, is whether her love for me is the same shape as her love for Derek. It is not. I have made peace with that. Dinner was Sandra Donovan's full production. Glazed ham, green bean casserole, sweet potato soufflé, the cornbread she only makes for occasions she considers worthy. The table was set with the good dishes, the ones that lived in the china cabinet and came out for Christmas and Easter and nothing in between. Derek and his wife Melissa were already there when I arrived. Melissa kissed my cheek and asked about Raleigh with the bright vagueness of someone who has run out of things to say to you but has excellent manners. Derek poured himself a bourbon and said, "Glad you could make it, sis," which is what he says every year, as though my attendance is a favor I am doing the room. I took my seat. The one by the kitchen. The one nobody fights over. We ate. My mother talked about her new sofa. My father talked about the Panthers. Derek talked about the restaurant, a new menu direction, a catering partnership he was exploring, the way he always talks about his ventures, with the confidence of a man who has never been asked to account for the ones that came before. Melissa refilled everyone's wine. I drank water. I needed to be very clear for what was coming. It was my father who stood up first. He tapped his fork against his glass, which he does when he wants the room. Robert Donovan is a big man in the way that some men simply take up space as a birthright. He cleared his throat. So, he said. Your mother and I wanted to share something with you both tonight. Something we've been sitting on for a few months. And that's when Derek reached down beside his chair and produced the champagne. He had been holding it beside his chair the entire meal. A bottle of Veuve Clicquot, the gold label, $22 more than the yellow. He set it on the table with both hands like he was presenting evidence. My mother pressed her fingers to her lips. My father smiled the smile he reserves for Derek's announcements, wide and uncomplicated, the smile of a man who has never once second-guessed which child he is most proud of. Melissa clapped twice, small and quick, like a woman who had been briefed and was now hitting her mark. I picked up my water glass. Derek stood. He does everything standing when he can. It gives him 4 inches he doesn't need and an authority he hasn't earned. Mom, Dad. He looked at them each in turn with the measured pause of someone who has rehearsed this. We did it. My father's head tilted. What do you mean, son? We found our solution. Derek reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and produced a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, the way people unfold things when they want you to understand that what's inside matters. I recognized the paper before he finished opening it. I had seen that letterhead before. It was from the property management company that had been brokering the Birchwood sale on my parents' behalf. Derek smoothed it against the tablecloth with his palm. There's an investor interested in developing the Birchwood property. A development group out of Charlotte. They want to put mixed-use units on that lot. They're offering $462,000. Above what Mom and Dad already got for it. He looked up from the paper. The plan is to negotiate a seller's carryback agreement and use the difference to refinance the restaurant debt and fund the expansion. My mother made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. My father stood up from his chair. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Derek had not finished. He looked at me then, the way he sometimes looks at me when he wants a witness to his competence. I've already spoken to a business attorney. The structure is clean. This time next year, we're debt-free and the second location is open. He set the paper down on the table, squared its edges, and reached for the champagne. That's when I spoke for the first time since dinner began. I said it without raising my voice, without straightening in my chair, without putting down my water glass. There's a problem with that plan, Derek. He looked at me the way he's always looked at me. Indulgent. Patient in the way of someone who is not really listening. What problem? I reached into my bag, which I had placed on the empty chair beside me when I arrived, the chair nobody had offered to hang my coat on. I removed a folder. Cream-colored, letter-sized, the kind James Whitmore uses for every document he sends because he believes presentation is part of the argument. I set it on the table in front of me. Birchwood Drive was sold in July. My father nodded slowly. We know that, Claire. That's what Derek's talking about. The development group wants to approach the new owner about a secondary transaction and we'd participate in the proceeds. I know. I opened the folder. I slid the top document across the table toward my father. He looked down at it. It was the deed of transfer, recorded with the county on July 8th. His eyes moved across the page. They stopped somewhere in the middle. I watched his face change. Not all at once. Slowly, the way ice changes when you hold it. His eyes moved to the bottom of the page. To the name of the purchasing entity. Birchwood Property Holdings LLC. And below that, member and sole owner, Clarinette Donovan. He looked up at me. My mother had leaned over to see. She made a sound I had never heard from her before. Derek had not moved. He was still holding the champagne bottle by the neck. Dad, I said, I am the new owner of Birchwood Drive. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Not the absence of sound but the presence of something too large for the room. Melissa set down her fork. My mother's hand was on the table, fingers spread flat against the cloth, like she needed to check that the surface was still solid. Derek's jaw had closed and then opened again and then closed. My father stared at the deed for a very long time. He is not a fast reader under normal circumstances. Under these circumstances I imagine the words were not behaving. Claire, he said finally, his voice careful, the way you are careful around something that might have edges. What does this mean? It means I own the house, Dad. It means that any development conversation goes through me. And it means that the plan Derek just described cannot happen without my agreement. Derek set the champagne down. It did not open. He looked at the folder, then at me, then at my father, and I could see him trying to find the version of this that made sense inside the world as he understood it. How, was all he said. My attorney structured the purchase through an LLC. The offer was made at fair market value. Your realtor recommended you accept it. You signed the documents remotely. Everything was legal and above board. I looked at Derek. Your development group out of Charlotte will need to speak with me directly. He didn't answer. He was still standing. If you're watching this and you're thinking, how long did she have to wait to say those words, the answer is 34 years. And I want to be honest with you. The moment itself did not feel like a movie. There was no swelling music. The Christmas tree was blinking in the corner the same way it had been blinking all evening, unaware of anything. The ham was still on the table going cold. What I felt was very quiet. Like a room after everyone has finally left and you can hear yourself think. If this story is reaching something in you, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support is what makes it possible for me to keep bringing you these stories. Now, back to that table. My father sat back down. The chair made a sound against the floor that no one acknowledged. He folded his hands in front of him. He does this when he is processing something he has not prepared for. In 34 years I had never once been the thing he hadn't prepared for. My mother found her voice first. Honey, she said, and her voice was frayed at the edges. She said it the way she calls me honey when she's frightened, not when she's dismissing me. Honey, why didn't you tell us? Because you didn't ask, Mom. A beat. You didn't ask how I was doing when you called to tell me you were selling. You didn't ask if I had any resources, any connections in real estate that might help. You called me to process your stress and then you made the decision with Derek and his contact. She opened her mouth. She closed it. My father was looking at the deed again. He turned it over as though the back might say something different. Derek had finally sat down. His blazer was still buttoned. His hair was still perfect. He looked like a man who had walked into a building he was certain he owned and found someone else's name on the lease. Which was, in a sense, exactly what had happened. Melissa was looking at her plate. She is a woman of good manners and this was outside her range. I want to be clear about something, I said. I am not here to punish anyone. The house sold for fair value. You received every dollar it was worth. That money is yours and I have no claim on it. What I am saying is that any future decisions about that property go through me. Derek looked up. So you're our landlord now? I'm the property owner, yes. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. This is insane. Is it? I kept my voice level. You've been making decisions about that property for 2 years. Decisions that affected all of us. The equity line. The startup capital. The conversation you had with the development group before you had even verified who the current owner was. A pause. I just asked the same question about who controls what. The difference is I did my homework first. My father's hand was flat on the deed. Claire. His voice had changed. The performing voice was gone. This was the underneath voice, the one he uses when the show is over. He sounded older than he had 20 minutes ago. I watched him. I didn't rush him. He swallowed. What do you want? I want what I've always wanted, Dad. I want to be in the room when decisions get made. I want to not be the last person in this family to find out what's happening. I want my work and my life to be taken as seriously as Derek's. His face did something complicated. I want the house to stay in the family. To not be converted into mixed-use units by a development group that has no connection to the people who built it. To stay what it is. A home. My grandfather's home. My grandmother's home. Our home. He looked at me for a very long time. Whatever I expected him to say, it was not what he said. He said, "Your grandfather would have liked you very much." I did not expect that. I sat with it. Melissa had started very quietly clearing plates, the kind of task a person invents when they need somewhere to put their hands. Derek was looking at the window. The champagne bottle was still on the table, unopened. My mother reached across and put her hand over mine. She didn't speak. Some things in families don't come with words attached. I knew she was not apologizing for all of it. She was not apologizing for the china cabinet box or the late graduation arrival or the 30 years of treating my accomplishments like they were happening at a polite distance. She was apologizing for tonight, which was the tonight she had. I accepted what she was offering. The fallout did not arrive all at once. That is the thing about family confrontations that the movies always get wrong. There is no clean ending, no door that shuts, no fade to black on a single decisive moment. What happened instead was a series of slower revelations, each one landing at its own pace over the days and weeks that followed. The first call came from Derek 2 days after Christmas. He did not open with an apology. Derek does not open with apologies. He opens with logistics, because logistics are the language he speaks when he is trying to reassemble something. He wanted to understand the terms. The arrangement as it stood, me as the owner, my parents in their apartment, the tenants in the house, was sustainable for now. But Derek's restaurant debt was real. The second location dream was real. And for the first time in his adult life, the path forward ran through his younger sister's front door. I told him I would consider options. I told him I would not consider options that put the property at risk or leveraged it against a business venture with a documented history of instability. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised me. He said, "How long have you been doing this?" "Real estate. My actual career. I've been regional director for 4 years," I told him. "Before that, senior associate for 3. "You manage a $90 million portfolio," he said. He had been doing research. He had Googled me, probably for the first time in his adult life. I told him that was correct. Another silence. He said, "Mom told people you do admin work." "I know she did." "Did you ever correct her?" "No." "Why not?" I thought about that for a moment. Because the people who needed to know already knew. He didn't have an answer for that. The second call came from my Aunt Patricia, who I knew would be reached by the news before the week was out because my mother cannot carry a secret heavier than a grocery bag. Patricia called on a Friday morning. She did not say hello. She said, "Is it true you own the Birchwood house?" I confirmed that it was. Patricia was quiet for 3 full seconds, which for Patricia is nearly meditative. Then she said, "Your grandmother would have loved this." I don't know why that was the sentence that got to me. I was driving on I-40 when she said it, and I had to put my blinker on and move to the right lane and breathe for a moment. My grandmother Eleanor had never been given any reason to believe I would be the one to hold the house. She left it to my parents in good faith. She did not know about the equity line or Derek's failed bar or the development group from Charlotte. She just knew she wanted the house to stay. And without knowing any of it, she had shaped a granddaughter who made sure it did. I told Patricia I had to go. She said, "Of course. One more thing before I let you go." She paused. "I always liked you best, Claire. Don't tell your mother." She hung up. The third and most significant consequence arrived not in a phone call but in a meeting. James Whitmore had advised me early in the process to be prepared for the possibility that my parents might consult their own attorney, that things could get complicated if the purchase was disputed. What actually happened was simpler and harder than litigation. My father called me on a Tuesday and asked if he could come to Raleigh. He said, "Just me. Not your mother, not Derek. Just me." He drove 2 hours on a weekday in January, which Robert Donovan does not do for anything less than a funeral. He arrived at my condo at noon. He stood in my living room and looked around at it slowly. The bookshelves, the clean lines, the framed architectural photographs I'd collected over the years. The view of downtown from the corner window. He was taking inventory of a life he had not visited before. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. He held the mug with both hands, the way my grandfather used to, and he looked at the table surface for a long moment before he looked at me. "I owe you an apology," he said. I did not rush to reassure him. "I know this is hard to say, Dad. Take your time." He was quiet. "Then, we didn't treat you fairly, Claire. Not at Christmas and not before Christmas. Not for a long time before that." I watched him. A man who takes up space as a birthright, sitting in my kitchen at noon on a Tuesday with both hands around a coffee mug, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He said, "I don't have an explanation that's good enough. I know that. But I want you to know that I see it." I sat with that sentence. In 34 years, nobody in my immediate family had said those words to me. Not once. He looked up. "What do you need from us?" That was the question. Not what do you want, which implies appetite. What do you need, which implies recognition of a debt. I told him the truth. I told him I needed what I had asked for at Christmas. To be in the room. To have my judgment trusted. To not have my life minimized to make Derek more comfortable. He nodded once, slowly. He said, "I'll talk to your mother." He said it the way a man speaks when he means it, flat and without decoration. He finished his coffee. He stood to go. At the door he paused. He turned back and looked at the room one more time, my room, my life, the one he had not looked at closely before. He said, "You built all of this yourself?" It was not entirely a question. I told him yes. He nodded again. He left. I closed the door and stood in the quiet of my own hallway for a long time. Outside, January light was doing what January light does, arriving low and thin and cold, the kind that doesn't warm anything but shows you the shape of things very clearly. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. A 34-year-old woman in a condo she owns, on a street in a city she chose, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she was listening to her father apologize for the first time. I thought about my grandmother Eleanor in 1969. $32,000 and a plot of land and a husband who believed in the shape of a future he couldn't fully see. I thought about the 7 oak trees. The 6 she planted. The 7th she never got to. I thought about what it means to build something that holds. I poured the cold coffee down the drain and made a fresh cup. There was work to do. The work I am referring to was not the house. The house was already handled. The work I mean is the slower, less visible kind. The kind that does not produce a deed or a signed document or a confrontation scene that lands cleanly in a single room. The kind that happens in phone calls that go longer than expected, in silences you choose to sit inside rather than fill, in the daily decision to remain open when every instinct formed in childhood tells you to close. February arrived. I drove to Cedar Falls on the second Saturday of the month, not to see my parents, though I would do that too, but to see the house. The tenants, a young couple named Owen and Grace, were exactly the kind of people my grandmother would have approved of. Owen teaches high school history. Grace is a pediatric nurse. They had a dog named Biscuit who barked once at my car and then sat down and reconsidered. They had hung a bird feeder on the back porch railing, the railing Thomas Donovan built in 1971, and there were 3 cardinals on it when I pulled around back. I did not go inside. That was not my place. The house was theirs for the term of their lease, and I had no interest in disrupting that. I just stood at the property line and looked at the rear yard. At the 6 oak trees. They were bare in February, the way oaks are, holding their shape without any decoration, just the architecture of themselves against a gray sky. I counted them the way I always count them. The way I have counted them since I was small enough that my grandfather could lift me onto his shoulders so I could see them all at once. 6 trees. 1 for each decade he lived. The 7th space, to the right of the last planted tree, was just ground. Grass going dormant for winter. A gap that had always been a gap. I had been thinking about the 7th tree since before the closing. Since before I made the first call to James Whitmore. Since, if I am honest, since the day my grandmother died and I stood in this same yard at the reception after the funeral and counted the trees and understood for the first time that some things are left unfinished not from failure but from timing. The 7th tree was a red oak I had been growing in a container on the balcony of my Raleigh condo for 14 months. I had started it from an acorn I collected from beneath the 6th tree the autumn before Eleanor died. I had not known then why I was doing it. I know now. I took a photo of the 6th tree and the empty space beside it and I sent it to Dara. She replied in 30 seconds. "You're going to plant it, aren't you?" I told her I was waiting for spring. She sent back a single word. "Good." March brought the kind of warmth that arrives in the Carolinas like a rumor before it arrives as a fact. The days were longer and the light was doing something different in the afternoons. I called my mother. We had been speaking more regularly since Christmas. Not without awkwardness, not without the occasional step backward into old patterns, but more regularly. She called me once to tell me about a conversation she'd had at church, a woman whose daughter had gone into finance. Isn't that something? Like it was a novelty, like it was a field women entered by accident. I let it pass. These were the moments I had promised myself I would let pass, not out of weakness but out of precision. I was choosing which hills to stand on and which ones to walk around. The hill worth standing on was the one that mattered. Everything else was geography. I called her on a Thursday evening and asked if she and my father would like to join me at the house on a Saturday in late March. I told them what I was doing. "I am planting a 7th tree," I said. "For Grandpa Thomas." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll bring lunch," she said. She did not ask whether Derek would be invited. She had learned, in the months since Christmas, to let me lead on questions like that. For the record, I had called Derek separately. I called him on a Wednesday morning, before he was fully awake, which is when Derek is most honest because he hasn't had time to assemble himself. I told him about the tree. I told him the Saturday plan. I told him he was welcome to come if he wanted to be there for the right reasons and that I would not be managing anyone's feelings on the day. He said, "I'll be there." I asked him how the restaurant was doing. He said, "Hanging in." I told him I had some thoughts about a possible arrangement, something I had been working through with James Whitmore, a structured lease agreement with a small-scale event space component in the back of the Birchwood property, nothing that altered the residential character. Nothing that compromised Owen and Grace's tenure, but something that could generate supplemental income and give Derek's catering partnership a proper anchor. He went quiet the way he does when he is listening without wanting to appear to be listening. What kind of arrangement? I told him it was preliminary. I told him we would need to sit down with both attorneys, mine and his, and look at the numbers together. I told him nothing was guaranteed and everything was conditional on the arrangement being genuinely viable and not a vehicle for absorbing debt. He said, "You've been thinking about this for a while." I told him that was how I worked. He said, "Yeah." He said it not with his usual tone, the one that rides just above condescension, but with something flatter and more real. "Yeah, I see that now." We did not have a movie moment. We did not reconcile over a speech or a shared meal or a tearful exchange on a porch. What we had was a phone call on a Wednesday morning where 2 siblings spoke to each other without performance for possibly the first time in their adult lives. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the beginning of something, though what it grows into I cannot tell you yet. I can tell you that Derek showed up on the Saturday in late March with work gloves and the right kind of shovel. He did not make a production of it. He just showed up with what was needed, which is, I have come to understand, the only metric that matters. My father drove. My mother brought lunch, a cooler with sandwiches and thermoses of coffee and a lemon pound cake she had baked from a recipe she found in my grandmother's handwriting on an index card inside the kitchen of the Birchwood house, a card Owen and Grace had found taped inside a cabinet door and left exactly where it was. My mother had photographed it on one of her early visits to return some items after the sale, and she had quietly baked the recipe without telling anyone. She set it on the tailgate of my father's truck and said nothing about where it came from. She did not need to. My father knew. Derek knew. I knew. Some things communicate themselves. Owen and Grace led us into the backyard. They stood on the porch with Biscuit and watched with the quiet respect of people who understand they are adjacent to something that belongs to a longer story than theirs. The container with the 7th tree had been in the bed of my father's truck, carefully secured. My father lifted it out himself. He is 61 years old and he did not ask for help. He carried it to the space between the 6th tree and the open ground and he set it down and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. You want to do the honors? I took the shovel. The ground was soft from a week of rain. The digging was not hard. Derek helped me widen the hole. My mother held the tree upright while we worked the root ball into place. My father filled in around it with his hands, packing the earth the way you pack something you want to stay. When it was done we stood around it, the 4 of us, in the backyard of the house my grandparents built. 6 trees and now a 7th, smaller than the others, just beginning. My father put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not need to. My mother took a photograph on her phone. She did not post it anywhere. She sent it only to me with a caption that read, "I'm proud of you, Claire." 3 words I had been waiting 34 years to receive in exactly that order without a qualifier attached. There was no but. There was no caveat. There was no comparison to Derek lurking somewhere in the sentence. Just "I'm proud of you, Claire," with a period and a photograph of a small oak tree in my grandmother's yard. I saved that text. I have not deleted it. I will not. The spring unfolded the way springs do when you are finally paying attention to them instead of bracing for what comes next. The arrangement with Derek moved forward through April, slowly and with appropriate caution. James Whitmore and Derek's attorney, a woman named Carolyn Vance who turned out to be extremely thorough and not at all interested in shortcuts, worked through the structure over 6 weeks of back and forth. The event-space component was modest, a permitted use of the detached garage behind the main house, which my grandfather had converted into a workshop decades ago and which the tenants did not use. It would accommodate Derek's catering partnership for small private events on weekends only, with a revenue split that was fair to all parties and a clause that protected Owen and Grace's quiet enjoyment completely. It was not the second location Derek had dreamed of. It was something smaller and more honest. A beginning that did not require anyone to leverage something they did not own. He signed the agreement on a Tuesday afternoon. He shook James Whitmore's hand, and then he turned and looked at me with an expression I did not have a category for. It was not gratitude exactly, though I think gratitude was somewhere in it. It was more like the look of a man who has spent his whole life being handed a key and is holding, for the first time, a key he had to work for. He said, "I'm not going to waste this." I told him I knew. I did know. Whatever his failures, Derek is not lazy. He is undisciplined and overconfident and has historically confused enthusiasm for a plan. But he is not lazy. Given a structure he cannot talk his way around, he has the capacity to build something real. I am watching to see if that's true. I will update you when I know more. My mother called me on a Sunday in May. This was a different kind of call, not the frightened call she makes when things have gone wrong, not the performing call she makes when the family audience is assembled. This was a quiet Sunday call, The kind where someone just wants to hear your voice without an agenda attached. She told me about her garden. She asked about my condo. She asked, carefully, whether I was seeing anyone, and when I told her I was, that there was a man I had been spending time with, a structural engineer named Paul who I had met through a client introduction 8 months earlier, she said, "Tell me about him." Not, "Is he from a good family?" Not, "What does he do for money?" "Tell me about him," with a genuine pause after it, space for a real answer. I told her about Paul. That he is methodical and funny in the dry way that sneaks up on you. That he builds things, actual buildings, and takes a level of pride in their structural integrity that I find quietly thrilling because I understand what it is to care about whether something will hold. That he brought me a book about the history of North Carolina architecture on our third date and that I read the whole thing in a weekend. My mother listened. At the end she said, "He sounds like someone worth knowing." That is my mother at her best. I try to remember that version of her when the other versions appear, the ones formed by years of comparison and performance and the exhausting project of managing how the family looks from the outside. She is all of these people simultaneously. The woman who boxed my diploma and the woman who baked my grandmother's lemon pound cake from an index card and sent me a photograph and said "I'm proud of you" with no qualifier and a period. I have stopped waiting for only one of her to show up. I take whoever arrives and I work with what's there. Patricia called in June. My Aunt Patricia, who delivers every piece of information at the same velocity regardless of its emotional weight, called to tell me 2 things. First, that she had told the story of Christmas dinner to her book club, all 8 members, and that the response had been, and I'm quoting her directly, "deeply satisfying to everyone present." Second, that she had spoken to Grandma Eleanor's former attorney in Wilmington while settling some remaining estate paperwork, and that the attorney had told her something she thought I should know. Eleanor Donovan had updated her will in the final year of her life. In the original version, the Birchwood house went to my parents outright. In the updated version, there had been a conditional clause, a stipulation that the property should remain in the family as a primary residence for a minimum of 10 years or pass to the eldest grandchild. The clause was never executed because my parents moved into the house themselves within the required timeline. The attorney had never needed to invoke it. Patricia told me this the way she tells everything, without preamble and without apparent awareness that it might require a moment to absorb. I sat with it. My grandmother had written a protection into the will. A quiet one. The kind you put in place not because you expect it to be needed but because you are a woman who has watched long enough to know that things do not always go the way they are supposed to. She had not trusted the house entirely to chance. And then I had bought the house, unknowing, and made Eleanor's intent true without ever having read her will. Some things are not coincidence. I do not know what to call them instead. I will leave that to you. The summer came. Paul and I drove to the Outer Banks in July, a trip I had been planning since spring. We stayed 4 days. On the second morning I took him to see the lighthouse at Cape Hatteras, which is the most structurally improbable thing in North Carolina and which Paul had opinions about that lasted the entire walk back to the car. On the third morning I drove past Birchwood Drive, not because we went out of our way but because the route took us near it and because I wanted him to see it. I slowed the car at the property line. He looked at the house, then at the trees, then at me. "Yours?" "Yes." He looked back at the trees. The 7th one was visible from the road, still small but leafing out in the summer heat, doing what young trees do when they are given good ground. He said, "Which one did you plant?" I pointed. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "It'll be the biggest one eventually." He said it the way he says things about structures, not as a wish but as an assessment. As a reading of what the materials can do given sufficient time. I put the car in drive. I believed him. "Here's what I want to tell you, if you have stayed this long. And thank you for staying this long. I want to tell you something that took me a long time to understand and that I could not have understood it any earlier than I did, because some knowledge has a minimum age requirement and no amount of intelligence can get you there ahead of schedule. I spent the first 30 years of my life trying to be seen by people who had already decided what they were looking at. Not out of cruelty, or not only out of cruelty, but out of the habit of their own perception, the grooves worn into how they understood the family, who was the capable one and who was the reliable one and who was the responsible one and who was the one who showed up quietly and filed things away. What I learned is this. Being unseen is only a disadvantage if you believe that visibility is the point. The point is not visibility. The point is the work. The quiet, specific, unglamorous work of building something that holds. The work of learning what you are doing well enough to do it without anyone's permission or attention or applause. My grandmother Eleanor understood this. She planted 6 trees and left space for a 7th and trusted that someone would know what to do with the space. She updated a will with a conditional clause and then left it there, quiet and ready, in case it was needed. She baked a lemon pound cake recipe on an index card and taped it inside a cabinet door in her own kitchen, not for any occasion, just because it was good and it should not be lost. She built things meant to outlast her, not because she needed credit for them but because she believed in the value of what endures. I am trying to be that kind of person. I am not always succeeding. There are still moments when my mother says something that lands in an old wound and I have to decide, in the space of a breath, whether to react from the wound or from the woman I am working to become. I do not always choose correctly. But I choose more deliberately than I used to. And that, I think, is what forward motion actually looks like. It is not a confrontation at Christmas dinner, though that was necessary. It is not a signed deed or a planted tree or a father sitting in your kitchen with both hands around a mug saying words he should have said years earlier, though all of those things matter. It is the daily decision to build instead of wait. To keep your own record. To know your own worth precisely enough that you do not need anyone else to calculate it for you. Derek's catering event started in August. The first one was a rehearsal dinner for 40 guests in the converted workshop behind Birchwood Drive. He called me the Monday after and said it went well. He did not elaborate and I did not press him. He sent me a photo instead, the garage lit from inside, tables set, a long string of Edison bulbs he'd hung himself running from the rafters. It looked like something my grandfather would have stood back and looked at and nodded at without comment. The 7th oak tree will take decades to match the others. That is the nature of trees and of most things worth having. Owen and Grace renewed their lease in September. Biscuit had learned not to bark at my car. I visited once a month. I always stood at the property line and counted. 7 now. Every time. I called Dara from the driveway in October, the way I sometimes do when I need to tell the story out loud to someone who knows all of it. She listened through the whole update, Derek and the event space, Paul and the Outer Banks, my mother's Sunday calls, the 7th tree leafing out in summer. When I finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what this is, right?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "This is what it looks like when the quiet one finally has enough room to be loud." I told her I didn't think I had been particularly loud. She said, "Claire, you bought the house. That's the loudest thing I've ever heard anyone do without raising their voice." She was right. Some days I drive past Birchwood Drive just because I can. Not to inspect anything, not to check on Owen and Grace, not to count trees or assess structures or review anything at all. Just to drive past a house on a street in the town where I grew up and know that it is still standing and that the right name is on the deed and that somewhere in the backyard, in soil tamped down by 4 sets of hands on a Saturday in March, a 7th oak tree is doing what trees do, quietly, patiently, without any need to announce itself, growing toward the shape it was always going to become. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story moved something in you, check out the other videos on your screen right now. I think you will find something there that stays with you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means everything and it is how I know to keep going. I will see you in the next one.